As all are no doubt aware, on Saturday, October 8th, the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas, which Palestinians in the Gaza Strip elected to be their political leadership, launched a wicked, evil, barbaric surprise attack on Israel, slaughtering over 1,300 innocent Israelis as well as 27 American citizens in cold blood. Iran aided and helped plan the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Hamas, and so Iran is every bit as culpable as Hamas. Today, we will look evil in the face and declare it to be exactly that, evil. Such despicable evil demands a swift and resolute response from Israel and from the leader of the free world and Israel's ally, the United States. Now is not the time for a reflexively anti-war posture. The attack on Israel is a continuation of the Islamist fundamentalist war against Israel, America, and the West in general. It is an attack by barbarians on Judeo-Christian civilization itself. It is decidedly in the interest of America to stand by Israel, destroy Hamas completely, and take bold action to deter the evil designs of Iran, other sponsors of Islamist terror, and other aggressors on the world stage. I'm Doug Wardlow, and this is Founding Principles.
A battle for the fate of America rages. The radical left seeks to destroy the very foundations of our republic. God, the family, and the Constitution are under attack. Amidst the chaos, Doug Wardlow speaks truth and points the way back to freedom. It is time to go on offense. This is Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
40 babies massacred by Palestinian terrorists. That's right. Israeli soldiers came across about 40 dead babies on Tuesday as they searched for survivors in the Kfar Aza kibbutz near the Gaza border. Some of the infants were beheaded. Some were burned. Let that sink in. It's truly bone-chilling. The evil, the unadulterated evil and wickedness and barbarism, it is something right out of the Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazis. Indeed, more Jews were killed on the day of the Hamas attack than on any other day since the Holocaust. One journalist who was with soldiers who were uncovering horror after horror on the ground said on Twitter, quote, "Talking to some of the soldiers here, they say that what they witnessed as they've been walking through these communities is bodies of babies with their heads cut off and families gunned down in their beds." Such depraved, unspeakable evil demands a swift, decisive response, not just from Israel, but also from all countries who want to count themselves as civilized, and particularly from the leader of the free world, the United States. And so Israel is at war for the first time since 1973. Israel's cabinet made the formal declaration on Sunday, October 8th, a day after Hamas launched the largest attack on Israel in 50 years, when thousands of rockets rained down on Israeli towns and 1,500 Hamas terrorists charged into Israel from the Gaza Strip, gunning down civilians and taking hundreds of hostages. They achieved total surprise, catching both Israeli and U.S. intelligence completely off guard. Israel's high-tech wall blockading the Gaza Strip was thought to be impenetrable, sporting razor wire, remote-controlled machine guns, and expensive sensors, all sitting atop a massive concrete base deep enough to stop tunneling. But Hamas breached it. The dawn surprise attack was covered by a rocket barrage striking all over Israel, as drones dropped explosives on surveillance equipment. Then, supported by sniper fire, terrorists used bulldozers and explosives to tear open the 20-foot-tall double wall in several places. On their heels were more than 1,500 militants bursting through the gaping holes in pickup trucks and on motorcycles, while others dropped in on gliders or landed on beaches and speedboats. Stunned Israeli border guards were killed, hid, or fled, caught totally unprepared. Once in Israel, the Hamas terrorists went on a killing spree, gunning down civilians wherever they could be found, in the streets, in their cars, in their homes, even at a musical festival. Those who were spared were captured and taken hostage. Their barbaric attack left over 1,300 Israelis dead and several times that number wounded. This attack was nothing short of pure evil. Its intent was to kill as many innocent Jews as possible. The old, women, children, babies, men, the entire Jewish population of Israel was targeted. Just like the Nazis, Hamas, which is an Arabic acronym for the Islamic resistance movement, wants to eradicate the Jewish people. So these Islamic fundamentalist terrorists that call themselves Hamas are Nazis. They are Nazis. They are every bit as evil, every bit as brutal, and every bit as dedicated to bloodthirsty Holocaust. Make no mistake, if the Hamas Islamist terrorists and their sympathizers and financiers had the power, they would gladly and swiftly kill every single Jew down to the last crying infant, and they would continue from there. No non-Muslim is safe. We must recognize that the gruesome, evil attack on Israel is a continuation of the extremist, fundamentalist Islamist war on the West, on Judaism, on Christianity, and on America as well, the country that they call the Great Satan. We must recognize that Hamas's war against Israel is a war of extremists who, like the pagans, reject Judeo-Christian principles, and especially the principle that human life is sacred. And it's a war against those who believe in the Judeo-Christian teaching that every human being was made in the image of the Creator. We must recognize that Hamas's war against Israel is a war of barbarians against civilization itself. Shortly after the brutal attack, Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, said, quote, "Babies, women, the elderly were dragged outside of their homes, were taken hostage. Civilians were shot, and most were massacred in cold blood walking on the streets. This is something that, is truly unprecedented. This is our 9/11. And it was, and the response must and will be swift and dreadful, just as ours was after the attacks on America in September of 2001. But here's the unfortunate truth. While evil barbarism is always shocking and surprising, in a different sense, we really shouldn't be surprised at the terrorist actions or their success. That's because this brutal attack was encouraged by the Biden administration's weakness on the world stage. The Biden administration's weakness, its plotting, reactionary nature, has made the world a much more dangerous place. In this case, Biden's actions from only a couple months ago directly aided the evil Hamas terrorists in their sinister and brutal plot. We must see strength and resolve return to the American presidency before any further violence spreads across the world stage or reaches our shores, but it might be too late. On Tuesday afternoon, Biden spoke to the nation about the attack. It took him 3 days, to address the American people about the most savage and evil and brutal Islamist attack since 9/11. And he did it during the day, when fewer people tune in. Not good. But Biden did confirm that Americans have been killed by the terrorists, at least 27 as of the time of this recording, and that an undetermined number of American citizens are being held hostage by Hamas. So we, America, we are now directly involved in a Middle East war. What is Biden going to do? Was he going to send the enemies in Iran another $6 billion? As most of you are no doubt already aware, back in September, President Biden unfroze $6 billion in Iranian funds. The money was oil revenue that had been frozen in South Korean banks when President Trump placed a total ban on Iranian oil exports and sanctioned Iran's banking sector in 2019. Then, this past August, we learned President Joe Biden approved an agreement essentially trading 5 U.S. citizens held by Tehran in exchange for the $6 billion in Iranian funds that had been frozen in South Korea. 5 Iranians held in the United States were also allowed to leave as part of the deal. One of them was a notorious high-volume arms dealer. Has the Biden administration not learned that you do not negotiate with terrorists? So Iran had a fresh pile of cash, $6 billion, to fund the operations of Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations, something Iran has been doing for many decades. Oh, but wait, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said last week that Iran has been unable to spend a single dollar of the $6 billion that were unfrozen by Mr. Biden. Okay, nothing to see here then, just move along. Well, we all know it doesn't matter whether the money Hamas used to carry out this horrific attack was the exact same money unfrozen by Biden. We know that money is fungible. We know Iran funds Hamas. We know that Iran now has $6 billion more to do with what it pleases, something it has said it will do. Indeed, the Iranian president said, almost boasting, that they will use the funds, quote, wherever they need it, in an interview with NBC News. Of course they will. Look what happened after Obama's disastrous 2013 nuclear deal that gave Iran $150 billion, including $1.7 billion in straight cash, pallets full of cash. Iran went on a frenzied terrorist spree, creating hell in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Iraq. We essentially paid for all of it, but I guess we cannot expect Biden to learn from those mistakes. This time, his people are running around saying that the $6 billion he gave Iran can only be used for humanitarian purposes, and that it hasn't been used in this attack, or for terrorism. Seriously? Okay, so now Iran has $6 billion more in the pot, freeing up $6 billion to help fund attacks on Israel, which is what happened. There is debate within the intelligence community as to exactly how much and exactly what type of help Iran gave this attack, but we know for certain that Iran currently provides about $100 million annually to Hamas and other Palestinian groups designated as terrorist organizations by the United States. And then, the Wall Street Journal reported about a day after the attack that Iranian security officials helped plan Hamas's attack and gave the green light for the assault at a meeting in Beirut just several days before the attack, according to senior members of Hamas and Hezbollah. The report also said a European official who advises the Syrian government corroborated the Hamas and Hezbollah leaders' claims. It's pretty direct evidence. Of course, our people aren't so sure. Apparently, the Biden White House believes, because of the long history of Iran's support for Hamas, that they are complicit in the attack, but Biden's people are saying they don't have direct evidence, but we do. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Tuesday, quote, We're looking to acquire further intelligence, but as I stand here today, while Iran plays this broad role, sustained deep and dark role in providing all the support and capabilities to Hamas, in terms of this particular gruesome attack on October 7th, we don't currently have that information. Close quote. Well, they have continued this company line since. Is that why we aren't doing anything about this attack? Is that why our only response has been to move a nearby carrier group and send over some missiles and ammo? Well, that's a good start, but it's not nearly enough. Not when you're talking about an evil and bloodthirsty Holocaust, a terrible war and a Holocaust. Now when you are talking about a war against one of our key allies and against civilization itself, that's what we're dealing with here. We don't need any further direct evidence of Iran's involvement. We've got that. We already know what happens when Iran comes into large sums of money. See the $150 billion from the failed Obama-Iran nuclear deal. By the way, that Iran nuclear deal, the one Obama started and Trump halted and Biden desperately wants to resume, well, it's led to Iran having a huge stockpile of 3,000 kilograms of uranium, most of it enriched to about 60%, which is a level far above what is needed for civilian use. And it's enough to make 8 to 10 nuclear bombs if it's further enriched. Worse, the IAEA found some uranium has been enriched to 83.7% purity, which is just shy of the approximately 90% purity needed for weaponization. So great job, Obama and Biden. Working your diplomacy with a terrorist state has really paid off. Iran might have nuclear weapons soon. But the recent $6 billion gift to Iran was just Biden's latest move that ended up aiding the terrorists who want to kill us all. Back in the spring of 2021, newly elected President Biden wasted no time in resuming U.S. aid to the Palestinians, something the Trump administration had wisely put a stop to. Trump also severed relations with the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian organization that rules a portion of the West Bank, which is actually Judea and Samaria, because of the Oslo Accords in 1993. Interestingly, the Palestinian Authority hasn't had elections in 15 years. Along with Hamas, the Palestinian Authority was the subject of a 2018 Human Rights Watch investigation that went on for 2 years. Here's how the report begins, quote, "In the 25 years since Palestinians gained a degree of self-rule over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, their authorities have established machineries of repression to crush dissent, including through the use of torture. That is how they treat their own people, and we just saw how they treat others. Hamas has been designated a terror organization for a long time, and the Palestinian Authority received special treatment in the Palestinian Anti-Terrorism Act of 2006. Section 4 includes this passage, quote, "The territory controlled by the Palestinian Authority should be deemed to be in use as a sanctuary for terrorist or terrorist organizations." But that hasn't stopped Biden from directing a cumulative $1 billion in aid to various Palestinian groups. U.S. law prohibits direct or indirect aid to the Palestinian Authority because they pay stipends to terrorists killed in attacks and to the terrorist families. But the aid is a strong signal to the Palestinian Authority that the Biden White House is on their side, and that in turn emboldened Hamas. There is a reason Trump stopped that aid. Biden's $6 billion prisoner swap deal did not send dollars directly to Iranian-backed terrorists, but it allowed more Iranian funds to flow to Hamas, furthering their gruesome cause and paving the way for the horrific attack on Israel. Similarly, sending $1 billion of aid into the realm of terrorists frees up $1 billion to spend on other things, no matter how many fronts and organizations the money goes through. And aside from that, why should we be sending millions upon millions to the Palestinians when there are several Arab nations right next door that should be shouldering the load? Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, why will they not help? Why won't those nations take in some Palestinians? Why won't Egypt allow refugees from Gaza in? They share a border. The truth is, none of these Arab nations want to deal with the Palestinians at all. But the real question is, why do Joe Biden and the left, including people like Ilhan Omar and the Squad, keep siding with the Palestinians and their terrorist allies? But to understand just how flawed the left's position is, we must dig a little deeper into exactly who these terrorists like Hamas really are. As I previously mentioned, Hamas is actually an acronym for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyah, which means Islamic Resistance Movement. It was founded by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, a Palestinian cleric who took up Islamic activism within the Muslim Brotherhood. In December of 1987, Yassin established Hamas as the Brotherhood's political wing in the Gaza Strip. This was seen by many as a part of the First Intifada, a massive Palestinian uprising against Israel's existence in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, that began in 1987 and only ended with the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993. A weak band-aid, nothing more. In 1988, Hamas published its charter, a 36-article document titled The Covenant of the Islamic Resistance Movement. It called for the destruction of Israel and the establishment of an Islamic State in its place. Article 7 of that charter makes the intentions of Hamas crystal clear. Quote, "The Islamic Resistance Movement aspires to the realization of all is promised, no matter how long that should take." And it continues, The charter continues like this, quote, "The prophet, Allah bless him and grant him salvation, has said," and then the charter quotes from the Quran, quote, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, when the Jews will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, 'O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him,'" close quote. That's in the charter, quoting the Quran, Hamas charter. And Hamas has been true to that vision ever since their first suicide bombings in 1993. These people are killers. Their purpose is to destroy Israel and kill Jews. Back in May 2021, during an 11-day conflict, Hamas and the Palestine Islamic Jihad, a terrorist group allied with Hamas, fired over 4,000 rockets from Gaza, killing 13 and injuring over 300 Israeli civilians. Hamas worked with Lebanon's Iran-funded Hezbollah during the attacks. Before that, in 2014, Hamas attacked Israel and killed 66 people. So you get the picture. Despite various offers of statehood and lands going back to the Oslo Accords in 1993 1995, Palestinian Arab leaders, they always say no. They continually refuse to recognize Israel's right to exist. Rather, they demand that all of what they see as Palestine, a country that has never really existed, be exclusively theirs, and of course that Israel be totally destroyed. Remember the Hamas Charter? It's all in there. It's in the PLO covenant as well. All the Palestinian groups, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, Hamas, whether they are designated terror groups or not, no matter their official function, no matter their described purpose, are essentially on the same team. And it's the team that embraces evil and wants to destroy Israel. It's the anti-Zionist team. And anti-Zionism is exactly the same thing as anti-Semitism, because anti-Zionism seeks to push Israel and all Jews in Israel into the sea. It is evil. Fatah and Hamas are political rivals, for example. Fatah controls the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and is represented in the PLO, while Hamas has no official representation within the PLO, even though Hamas controls and governs the Gaza Strip. While these groups might disagree at times about strategy and tactics, they all want the same thing, the destruction of Israel. Like I said, it's in the founding documents of both the PLO and Hamas, even though their tactics have been different. In other words, when push comes to shove, they will support each other in order to realize their terrible goal, the destruction of Israel. Just listen to the deputy head of Palestinian mission to the EU, Hassan al-Balawi, speaking just 3 days after the brutal Hamas attacks on innocent Israelis. He said this, quote, "Yes, I want to be able to condemn the attack one day. The day when the Israeli state respects its borders, and the day when there is an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, the day when Palestinians have fundamental rights. If there were an attack on that day, I would condemn it. But in the current situation, I cannot condemn," close quote. The Palestinian mission to the EU is supposed to be of the respectable political nature, but clearly that's just not true. When you have the head of that mission saying that he wants to condemn the slaughter of innocents in their beds and the beheading and burning of infants, but he can't condemn it because of the current situation? Those are universally condemned things, depraved evil of the most stark and clear kind, but he just can't condemn it. In other words, he is okay with perpetrating despicable evil, provided it serves his cause. Disgusting and contemptible. But some of the initial, now revised reactions coming out of various parts of the Biden administration were almost as bad. In the aftermath of the attack, Secretary of State Blinken put out a tweet that is downright despicable before hurriedly deleting it. Blinken apparently met with the Turkish foreign minister to discuss the situation, or called him, shortly after the attack. The next day, Sunday, Blinken tweeted that he, quote, encouraged Turkey's advocacy for a ceasefire, close quote. What? Israel just had over 1,300 of its citizens slaughtered, with many more captured, and Blinken wanted Israel to stand down? What, did he want the terrorists to get away? Was he trying to say that any Israeli response would be just as bad as intentionally murdering babies and children in their beds? Calling for a ceasefire is moral equivalency, and it is beyond wrong. At least Secretary Blinken has now visited Israel to show our support. That's good. But here's a question for you. Why was Blinken talking to Turkey about the Hamas attack in the first instance? The Times in Britain reported in 2020 that Hamas set up a base in Istanbul, Turkey, for carrying out cyber attacks. Apparently, other Western intelligence sources confirmed the report. And not long ago, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies released a report titled, quote, Hamas operations continue unhindered in Turkey. Under Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey has veered towards cooperating with terrorists. But let's not leave the State Department's Office of Palestinian Affairs out. They too tweeted out something that is very telling and very disturbing not long after the attack, only to delete the tweet a short time later. The tweet read, "We, quote, unequivocally condemn the attack of Hamas terrorists and the loss of life that has incurred. We urge all sides to refrain from violence and retaliatory attacks. Terror and violence solve nothing," close quote. Again, this is getting old. What? Are you kidding me? They urge Israel to refrain from violence, to refrain from retaliation? So apparently the Office of Palestinian Affairs wanted Israel to sit on its hands and do nothing while they are being slaughtered. The only people who would say this are people who sympathize with the terrorists. This type of subhuman barbarity perpetrated by Hamas needs to be stamped out with all the force possible. It is evil. It needs to be called out as evil. And it needs to be removed from the earth. We, Israel and the United States, must do everything possible to make sure that Hamas ceases to exist and that no one else ever thinks about doing anything like this ever again. Violence solves nothing? Well, that's the type of thing that starts wars. How do you think we got rid of the Nazi menace? With extreme violence. And that is how we must deal with this Nazi menace, with extreme violence. I guess the leftist clowns in our government would rather we had just sat on our hands after 9/11. Sit around and wait for the next attack? Let the terrorists gather their strength and refine their plans to kill even more people the next time around? Well, if that is what they want Israel to do, and that's the message being sent by anyone who calls for a ceasefire, then these people are on the side of the bloodthirsty terrorists, period. Senator Rubio had it right in his recent tweet, quote, anyone demanding Israel not escalate or calling for a ceasefire is either out of touch with this unfortunate reality or sympathizes with Hamas. But at least Biden waited 3 whole days to address the nation at around 3 p.m. on the Tuesday after the attack. This horrific situation required a primetime speech from the Oval Office. Unfortunately, something old Joe is simply unable to do. At least he didn't ask Israel to show restraint or call for some type of ceasefire. He said, quote, so in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel, and we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. That's good. Then he went after Hamas. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of the Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price. There is no justification for terrorism. There is no excuse. He is right, absolutely right. That is very good. But those are just words. What we need right now is action. By Wednesday morning, the only thing Biden did was move a carrier group that was already nearby and deliver some ammunition by cargo plane. And as of Friday, haven't done much more. It's just not enough. This historically horrific attack requires an immediate, forceful response, and not just from Israel. The leader of the free world must lead the charge against this reckless depravity, this pure, unadulterated, and evil attack on an ally and on civilization itself. Unfortunately, the Biden White House has been too busy making life easier for the terrorists. Back in January, it came to light that the Pentagon used an arms cache of U.S. weapons in Israel to supply Ukraine. That's right, it used an arms cache of U.S. weapons in Israel to supply Ukraine. Meant to supply allied forces in the event of war in the Middle East, our leaders decided Ukraine needed it more. Hundreds of thousands of artillery shells left Israel and ended up doing nothing to affect the stalemate in Ukraine. At least we hope they ended up in Ukraine, that is. Back in January, NBC reported that Indian authorities told them that militants in Kashmir, who are trying to control the region for Pakistan, are equipped with a host of U.S. weapons and ammunition that hadn't been seen in the conflict before. That is, until after the disastrous Biden retreat from Afghanistan that left billions worth of U.S. weapons behind completely intact. So yes, our left-behind weapons are migrating to other conflicts. And now there are reports that Hamas militants have indeed been using our gear in this attack. Indeed, they used it in their recent savage attack on Israel, and this isn't surprising, really. Did we really not think that the Taliban wouldn't sell our gear to terrorists the planet over? Congresswoman Green tweeted the right thing. She said that we need to check the serial numbers of any Hamas weapons that the Israelis capture. There's a very good chance that our weapons from both Afghanistan and Ukraine are littering the battlefield in Israel, used by Hamas to kill innocents. Of course, Biden and his lapdog media will do all they can to keep that info under wraps. Watch carefully. We know the Taliban is selling our weapons. We know Hamas and the Taliban fight for the same side, and some of our left-behind weapons are in the hands of Hamas as we speak. Yes, Biden has made life much easier for the terrorists, unwittingly paving the way for this attack, emboldening our enemies ever since he took office. Now we have 27 Americans and over 1,300 Israelis dead, and hundreds of hostages in Hamas captivity, including Americans. This is the largest and most sophisticated terrorist attack on the West since September 11, 2001. And make no mistake, this is an attack on Israel and also on the West in general. It is an attack of depraved evil on the very concept of civilization itself. But remember this, none of it would have been possible without serious aid from Iran. Everyone is talking about Hamas, and with good reason, but the real threat, the power pulling the strings, is the Israel and America hating theocracy in Iran, the one that's about to get nuclear weapons if we don't stop them. And Biden didn't even mention Iran in his speech to the nation on Tuesday. After serious backlash, Biden told Iran to be careful on Wednesday. I'm sure they will never make trouble again. It's just unconscionable. Remove Iranian support and Hamas, Hezbollah, and most of the radical Muslim terror groups outside of maybe Al-Qaeda and ISIS lose their teeth overnight, but especially Hamas and Hezbollah. Yes, they would still operate, they would still raise funds and cause trouble, but that trouble would not mount to what we saw last Saturday. The resources to fund their evil intentions and fanatical desire to kill Jews just wouldn't be there. Their fanatical desire to kill Jews would be there, but the resources to fund those evil intentions and that fanatical desire would not be there. And Iran's leadership shares those dark, wicked desires. Not long after the attack, Yahya Rahim Savahi, a senior advisor to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said, quote, "We support the proud operation," referring to the Hamas murderous attack. The Iranians have been very clear over the years about their desire to wipe Israel off the map. Hamas, Hezbollah, the PLO, they all want the same thing, but it is Iran that actually has the power to make it happen. As such, they must be dealt with just as harshly as Hamas. President Biden must act now. Stop talking and act. He's already wasted precious time responding to this century-defining moment. On Thursday, Secretary of State Blinken offered up more words. Quote, "The message that I bring to Israel is this: you may be strong enough to defend yourself on your own, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side." Close quote. That's good, very good. But again, it is just more words. Where is the action? Why are our aircraft carriers where are aircraft just still sitting on the carriers? Why is Biden, who professes to stand by Israel, hesitating and sitting on his hands like a frightened child? Resupplying the Iron Dome is great, but it's not enough. Being nearby, it's not enough. This attack happened a week ago already. Time is passing. Critical time. Now Israel is starting its ground offensive into the Gaza Strip after sealing off the enclave post-attack. Netanyahu said on Wednesday that every Hamas terrorist will be destroyed, and they must be. Now is the time for America to extend real, actual help to Israel. We know what happens next. Hamas will use its own citizens as human shields. They have already placed important headquarters facilities under hospitals and the like. Hamas will maximize the number of its own citizens that will die in the Israeli ground assault, all in a vile, wicked attempt to gain sympathy and paint Israel as the aggressor, even though it is Hamas and Iran that bear total, complete responsibility for all of this atrocity. Biden must ignore the inevitable condemnation of Israel and calls for restraint that are already coming from the likes of Bernie Sanders, who said Israel violated laws by striking back at Hamas. Absurd. Biden should back up his Stand By Israel statements with more than just arms shipments. He should send U.S. aircraft to strike Hamas alongside the Israelis. He should give Israel access to every means of surveillance and targeting that we have. He should put U.S. Marines, who are already nearby in the vicinity of the Mediterranean, on Israeli soil, even if for nothing other than to just deter any more conflict. He should ask Netanyahu what exactly he needs to utterly and totally destroy Hamas, and then give the Israeli leader everything he needs without hesitation right now. And he must coordinate with Israel to strike Iranian nuclear facilities now, before they can make atomic weapons. Iran is more than complicit in Israel's 9/11 and must be dealt with as we dealt with Al-Qaeda. And no, we do not need any further evidence of Iranian involvement. We already have it. We have plenty of evidence. And Hamas's actions are an extension of Iranian interests. The Iranians must be held accountable for this merciless attack because their support and planning made it possible. Their $100 million in assistance per year, their training assistance, their operatives who worked with Hamas and the other terrorist organizations they support, all those things make Iran just as much to blame as Hamas itself. It is time for Biden to show real strength for once. His glaring weakness has led to violence and mass death around the globe. This time, he mustn't blink while staring down pure evil. He must lead the charge to utterly and ruthlessly destroy that evil, just as we did after 9/11 and just as we did with Nazi Germany, because the hateful, grotesque, and vile nature of this threat is just as horrific and just as deadly. Anything less is to aid the darkness in its quest to drench our planet in blood. So, let us call out the darkness and name it for what it is. Let us stand up for Israel. Let us pray for Israel. And may history record that at this crucial hour, America did everything in its power to fight evil and defend the good. If you like the content we're providing and you're watching this on Rumble or YouTube or any of the other platforms we're on, please go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel. Doing those things helps us immensely. And if you're watching on Frank Speech, please keep watching on Frank Speech on Lindell TV. It's great to be coming to you on that fantastic platform as well. So now it's time for Behind the Headlines. First up today, well, we still do not have a Speaker of the House. There have been many developments over the course of the past week, but as of the time of recording, still no Speaker. The Democrats are indeed loving this. Last time I spoke about the need for a plan and the need to effectively take on the left. Well, let me touch on one other thing. We need to look effective as well. One thing the left is good at is looking effective and being effective. Their leadership makes sure they run like a well-oiled machine. That well-oiled machine, of course, kills American jobs, pollutes our culture, tears down the fabric of America, but they do it all very efficiently. And more often than not, a sizable portion of the public buys the Democrats' lies. They buy into what the Democrats are doing just because they do it efficiently and they message it well. So they buy those lies. A sizable portion of the public sees how the Democrats operates, and they think, well, they can govern. They move quick. There's no gridlock within that party. They're just better at governing than the Republicans. Well, that's not a good thing for people to be thinking. And it's quite ridiculous, of course. For one thing, the government isn't supposed to move quickly. The multiplicity of laws is a bad thing for individual liberty. That should be common sense, but unfortunately right now common sense is in short supply. But these sideshows, they hurt our brand, and it does make elections harder to win. Now that Steve Scalise has stepped aside, the obvious choice for Speaker is Jim Jordan, at least as of right now. He seems like a true conservative who can unite the party and deliver wins for the conservative cause. But all this theater, the failure to elect a Speaker, it only grows worse with each passing second. Republicans should focus on quality over quantity, of course. We don't want to do things just to do them. We need to have a purpose and be methodical in our actions. At the same time, we can't let constant infighting become the norm because it does look chaotic, and that's not good. Now, it is important not to be chaotic and not to appear chaotic, but it's also important to get the right man for the job, someone who will not just go with the status quo. That's equally important. So Republicans need to unite around a true conservative. We need someone who can bring the fight to the Democrats and demonstrate to the American people that there is a different, better way to govern. A way that doesn't just ignore crises like the debt crisis and just kick the can down the road. So let's hope Representative Jordan, or whoever is the next speaker, is up to that important task. All right, second up today. Many people have speculated that President Biden will not make it to the November 2024 election one way or another. His physical and mental health have long been a topic of discussion during the painfully long last 3 years of his presidency. He might decide not to run. He might not be in a position to run for any number of reasons. But Carrie Lake recently reiterated that view on X, formerly Twitter, adding that she believes Gavin Newsom will be tapped for the top spot if the left isn't sufficiently confident in President Biden. Far-left political commentator Cenk Uygur officially launched his presidential campaign recently as well. Seeking the Democratic nomination, Cenk said that Biden created twice as many jobs as Trump had at this point in his presidency. The vast majority of the public sees through that kind of nonsense, of course, and understands that Trump was far, far better for the economy. But Cenk Uygur added, if Biden can't make his case effectively for America, it's up to someone to sell what Democrats can do for America. Really? That's laughable. Sell what the Democrats can do for America? Look what they've done to America. It's terrible. Now, the figures he's using on the jobs question, they're obviously completely wrong and bogus. Job creation in Biden's economy has been made up entirely of jobs that came back after COVID and unconstitutional government shutdowns put people out of work. So it's just the economy kind of rebuilding itself. It's kind of like this. You can reopen your business, small business owner. How many employees do you have right now? Oh, 5? Well, look at that. That's 5 jobs that Biden created. And we'll just forget about the fact that you had 10 jobs before COVID and before the unconstitutional shutdown. We'll just put that 5 jobs right in the jobs created by Biden category. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. But around that misleading puffery of Biden's numbers lies an interesting point. Biden cannot sell himself to the American people effectively. Why is this? Well, for one, pretty obvious, he's a terrible president. He has destroyed the economy, emboldened China, furthered the political divide, fallen asleep at several important events, had a pathetic response to the fires in Hawaii, and the Afghanistan withdrawal that will live in infamy, not to mention the $6 billion to Iran and the aid to Palestinians that flowed to Hamas. It's a terrible record of failure and malfeasance in office. All of the polls show Trump holding a commanding lead. This will be Trump versus Biden, and Trump only has to ask the American people, are you better off today than when I was president? The answer to that question is, of course, we were much, much better under Trump. So where does that leave Democrats? Well, the problem is bad presidents can win re-election, and bad candidates can become presidents. Consider this. Obama had charisma, and Mitt Romney was a spineless jellyfish. And Mitt Romney, I think, by all accounts, still is a spineless jellyfish. So even though the first 4 years of the Obama presidency was worse than a dud, it was just terrible, Obama was still able to beat a weak, spineless Republican. Biden has no charisma, and he can't form coherent sentences. But Gavin Newsom? Well, he does have charisma, and he can form coherent sentences. So he's dangerous. He's radical. And many, many Democrats would rather see him at the top of the ticket than Biden. So really, this GOP primary shouldn't be dragged out too much longer. Trump has an insurmountable lead on the other Republicans. We need to use our momentum to our advantage, putting the Dems out of contention before we get to November, well before. Our country depends on it. All right, third up today. 5 Minnesota police officers were shot while executing a search warrant just outside of Princeton, Minnesota, about an hour and a half northwest of Minneapolis. Thankfully, all the officers are expected to survive. Let us pray for their complete and speedy recovery. Now, the officers were apparently working in undercover capacity, so their identities haven't yet been released to the public. The story is getting some national media attention, but let me tell you a little bit about the area that this shooting occurred in. This was not Minneapolis. It wasn't St. Paul, not even Duluth. This was not an urban area or even really a suburban one. This was a relatively small town in a community where things like this just don't happen. I think we are also used to crime and violence in large metropolitan areas that we skip over more rural communities and forget that crime is surging in those areas too, particularly crime involving drugs and also human trafficking. So when we say back the blue, that means everywhere. Big towns, big cities, small towns alike. If you have worn the badge or you have family that has worn the badge, you know the dangers that are involved with the job. Brave men and women all across Minnesota and all across the United States risk their lives to keep our communities safe every day. And all too often, it's something that too many of us take for granted. Yes, police in large cities do need a lot of support because oftentimes they have leftist district attorneys or county attorneys, prosecutors that don't support them and refuse to prosecute the criminals that the police risk their lives to arrest. Thankfully, most rural communities do have, in general, communities that are largely supportive of the police. But let's not forget that law enforcement everywhere should be honored for doing the important job of maintaining law and order and doing so at great risk to themselves. So let's always be sure to back the blue. Okay, third up today, we have a story from Fox News. Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor. Jake Sullivan's foreign policy blunders resurfaced after hyping up Middle East peace days before Hamas attacks. This article says, published October 12th. Let's read a bit from this. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the Middle East was the calmest it has been in decades, bringing to the forefront other controversial foreign policy decisions the Biden advisor has been involved with over the last decades. Here's something that Sullivan said, quote, "The war in Yemen is in its 19th month of truce. For now, the Iranian attacks against U.S. forces have stopped. Our presence in Iraq is stable. I emphasize for now because all that can change. The Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. He said. This was 8 days before Hamas launched its violent and atrocious attack on Israel and killed over 1,300 Israelis and 27 Americans. It seems pretty naive, doesn't it, that our national security advisor, in charge of the National Security Council, would say that the Middle East is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades, even at the time he said it. That's just simply not true. That's a falsehood. But then we see the Hamas attack, and we can just tell from that Jake Sullivan is clearly incompetent. He has no idea what he's doing. And this isn't the first time that Jake Sullivan's incompetence has been on display for all to see. Sullivan, the article says, has been at the center of several controversies in recent years, many of which have been brought up by conservatives on social media in light of his Middle East comment, including the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. In the days following the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan, Sullivan and the State Department were criticized for being unable to say exactly how many Americans had been left behind. I mean, that is complete incompetence. Complete incompetence. And it's not just that. Sullivan was also around for the Benghazi attack. He was working with Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, in 2012. And, he was Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's Deputy Chief of Staff and Policy Advisor at the State Department during the 2012 attack on the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi. It's ridiculous. So Senator Josh Hawley, his press secretary, said that Sullivan should have lost his job after the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, and that's completely correct. Completely correct. He should have lost it a long time ago. But how does a person with no real foreign policy experience, who bumbles his way through multiple situations all the way back to 2012 in Benghazi, the Afghanistan withdrawal debacle, and now these comments in advance of the Hamas attack, how does he still have his position? It's complete incompetence. The Biden administration is full of fools and leftist ideologues. It's completely unacceptable. Jake Sullivan he's a lawyer. He's just a lawyer, and he's an elitist political hack. That's all. These are the kind of people that the Biden administration has put in charge of important things like the national security of the United States. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has destroyed and messed up every single foreign policy incident he has ever touched. He needs to go. He needs to resign. And it just shows you how bad the Biden administration really is. And also, it's scary to think about this. Joe Biden really isn't in charge of his faculties. We all know that. So who's really in charge? Well, it's people like Jake Sullivan. And that's why we're in the mess that we are in. The next presidential election cannot get here soon enough. All right, fifth and finally today, an article from Breitbart News. Headline, China's ceasefire to stop Israel from defending itself is a top priority. So that's what China said, that a ceasefire to stop Israel from defending itself is a top priority. The Chinese Communist regime, ignoring criticism for not taking a stand against the rape gangs and death squads Hamas unleashed against Israeli citizens on Saturday, continued trying to rescue Hamas from the consequences of its own actions on Thursday by demanding an immediate ceasefire, followed by Israel making concessions to the Palestinians, according to the story from Breitbart News. The story continues, quote, China will continue to promote a ceasefire to end the violence, help to alleviate the humanitarian crisis, actively encourage peace and promote talks, and play a constructive role in promoting a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine, said China's Middle East envoy, Jai Jun. Isn't that interesting? I mean, China is coming out on the side of the Palestinian terrorists. That's because China wants violence, China wants chaos, but it's a little bit ironic, but China is probably the biggest abuser of Muslims in the entire world. They've got 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in far northwestern China. It's interesting. So the story goes on. The regime in Beijing has yet to denounce the brutal Hamas attack, saying only that it was saddened by the loss of life on both sides and urging all parties to act with restraint, which of course means siding with Hamas and siding with the terrorists, because anyone who's calling for restraint after such atrocities committed by Hamas, well, they're siding with Hamas and the terrorists. Chinese officials have refused to use the word terrorism even to describe the actions of Hamas, or even acknowledge that Hamas sparked the current round of hostilities with a sneak attack on a Jewish holiday. China wants the violence. You know why? Or two reasons. One, they want to encourage more violence to destabilize their Western enemies. And they want to open up opportunities for them to then be able to take Taiwan. Because they've got their eye on Taiwan. China wants to grow its power in that region and beyond, project its power out through the Pacific. They need Taiwan to do that, so they want to take Taiwan. The more violence and chaos they can cause or help cause, the better for them. Now, Politico, the story says, suggested China is even playing a longer ideological game because, like the Soviet Union before it, the Chinese want to use oppression narratives and decolonization movements to destabilize its Western adversaries. Well, that's exactly what China is doing. That's the other piece of this. China is, trying to push the idea that Israel is somehow an occupier and a colonizer, which is completely bogus. Just like they would then say the United States is an occupier and a colonizer, to delegitimize Western democracies, and then to somehow try to increase by comparison the legitimacy of their own terrible, brutal, horrible regime, which is not democratic at all, and which suppresses human rights all across the board of the Uyghurs and of Chinese citizens alike. But that's the game that they're playing. Weaken their Western adversaries by pushing that ridiculous decolonization narrative and create chaos and violence in order to open up opportunities for them to take Taiwan and expand their power. So we cannot forget about China and the Chinese Communist Party as we focus on the other threats around the world. And it's very, very important right now that the United States act swiftly and decisively in response to the terrible, atrocious Hamas attack on Israel that killed 27 Americans. We got to do that now, and we got to respond to Iran as well because they supported it. We got to make definitive actions right now to send a clear message to evil regimes all across the world, whether they're evil regimes and also non-state actors like Islamic terror groups, that they shouldn't think about messing with the United States or messing with Israel because there will be serious consequences. We need to send that strong and clear message now. We need to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, and we need to make sure that China's on notice that we will take action if they do anything to invade Taiwan. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, if you're watching on any platform that allows you to like our video or subscribe to the channel, please do that because it helps us multiply and grow the impact of the show. And remember, one more thing. Actually, we'll do two more things. The CCP must be destroyed and Hamas must be destroyed.